Alright, so we are on the second day of 7.3 where we're going to pretty much advance what we did, but this also is going to have some quiz review for you. So far this unit has asked us to apply property of multiplication to problems in which there is an exponent outside of the parentheses. This lesson here is just going to expand on that idea. It's also going to introduce problems that combine everything we've learned this week. Yesterday we saw problems that look kind of like this, to where we have t to the negative fourth going to the seventh. And what we learned to do is, because this 7 is right outside of a parentheses, we know that we are supposed to distribute it or drop it down to this 4, making t to the negative 4 times 7, which is t to the negative 28th. Sorry, I need a negative there. And once we have that negative 28, we understand that is supposed to drop because it does not want to be there, making 1 over t to the 28th. Again, that is the overall idea of what we were looking at on yesterday. Today what we're going to do is take it a step further. You still have a number outside of the parentheses. The difference is there is more than one term inside of the parentheses, and so what we have to do is take this 5 and actually send it to everything inside of the parentheses, and that is the only adjustment we make. Notice you had 7 drop down to 4 and multiply. Now 5 is going to drop to everything. One of the tough parts of this is that you do not multiply 5 by 3. That actually just becomes a power for 3. And then m goes to the 3 times 5, and n goes to the negative 4 times 5. So again, 5 just becomes a power for 3. It actually multiplies by this 3 and then multiplies by that negative 4. To simplify it, we'll take it here. We will figure out what 3 to the 5th is. Yes, I still need batteries. 3 to the 5th, which is 243. And then we simplify this to be m to the 15th and n to the negative 20, which of course now we have that one rule that we have to follow, which is no negative exponents, which means that n does not want to be there. So 243 m to the 15th over n to the 20th would be your final answer. So again, we have all these rules coming in. We've got our zero properties, we've got our negative exponent properties, we've got multiplying where you add the exponents. Now you've got things where we multiply and distribute. It is a very good week in terms of the information, because I think it's within your reach. You just have to make sure again that you actually, I guess you can't make sure because the work you would have done over the last few days will put you in good position for tomorrow. The word for our process is distribute. Again, you understand that distributive property is where I take something here and I multiply it by everything on the inside. Notice those lines that I drew to show the distributive property is the same thing I did with that power. The hardest part of the process is distributing the exponent to things that do not have an exponent already, kind of like what I told you. So what you want to understand is that if I am distributing 2 to the 5, it simply becomes a power for the 5 because 5 doesn't have an exponent. If I am distributing this 2 to the g, it becomes a power for g. But as 2 drops down to the h to the third, that is where I do my multiplication. So now you go ahead and simplify 5 to the second, which is 25. G to the second, h to the sixth is where you would stop there. So just remember, if there is no exponent, the outside exponent will simply take its place. As long as you work out the problems with this process, it should be decently easy. I'm not going to say it's simple, but as long as you are organized, you can get it done correctly. Most of the stuff that people have issues with in math is because they're unorganized. They don't write clearly, and they can't follow what they wrote in the line before, which causes them to make mistakes and decisions later on. So again, as you're getting older, as you're getting more responsibility, it's time to start working on your organization. As you organize your math work, you organize your natural thoughts, you actually make better decisions overall. So anyway, this is just again working on your organization, so please make sure you start to take your time and write things in a way that allows you to be successful. A few more problems here, which is actually a big few. We're just going to kind of work through them to show you some things before we go. So again, we distribute this 2, we get 4 to the negative second, t to the 3 times negative 2, u to the negative 4 times negative 2. 4 to the negative second. Notice how you can type it in the way it is, but we don't want a decimal, we want a fraction, so math, enter, enter, is 1/16. T will go to the negative 6. Notice I'm just putting it beside it, and u will go to the 8th. Now here's what happens whenever you have a fraction of a number and then two variables. Remember that the negative exponent means t wants to go down. The positive exponent means u wants to go up. So you end up with u to the 8th, which goes to the top, over 16 t to the 6th. That is how you clean that up. Again, you can put your fraction down, which is your 1/16th, but because t to the negative 6 was negative, you move it down with the 16. Because u to the 8th was positive, you move it up with the 1, which again, you remember you don't need the 1 there because there's already something to hold its place. Alright? This one here is a little different because most people, if I say how many things are inside the parentheses, they would say 3. They would say the s to r and the negative 3. But really, what you have in here is 4 things. The negative is being repeated 3 times. And if you think about a negative, 1 negative is always negative. 2 negatives is always positive. The third negative, which is what we're talking about, would always make it negative. An easy way to think about it, again, I think we've talked about this, is if it's an odd number of negatives, it's going to be negative. Well, 3 is an odd number, and you now have 3 negatives, which means it's going to be negative something. 3 is going to, of course, go to the third because that power drops onto the 3. R is going to go to the 5 times 3. S is going to go to the negative 3 times 3. So again, notice the organization is, I deal with the negative, I deal with the 3, I deal with 5 times 3, I deal with negative 3 times 3, and then I simplify. Negative 3 to the third is 27. R to the 15th, S to the negative 9th. And here's the trick. Remember, you cannot have a negative exponent. Do not fall for the fact that you think that this is a negative we have to deal with. A negative in front is fine. You cannot have a negative in the exponent. So negative 27 is happy. R to the 15th is happy. S to the 9th moves down to the bottom. And again, that is going to be the toughest part about this section here, is just making sure you're ready to organize and follow the rules that you really have hopefully been practicing, but you have to actually know them now to apply them the right way. The good news is the answer key is always available, and hopefully you don't just use the answer key to copy your work, but to actually try to figure out what you did wrong. Again, math is not so much about finding the right answer, it's about figuring out why you did not get the right answer, because when you see that enough, eventually you can anticipate the error and not make it in the first place. In this case, again, you've got a negative, a 7, a F, and a G. 4 negatives, as I told you, the first is negative, second is positive, third is negative, fourth is positive, so it's a positive number. 4 will go to the 7th, or sorry, 4 goes as the power to the 7th. F does not have a power, so 4 will become the power for that, and then G will go to negative 2 times 4. So we need to know what 7 to the 4th is, so 7 caret 4, which is 2401. F to the 4th, G to the negative 8th. And again, to follow the rules of what we learned, we cannot have a negative exponent, so 2401 F to the 4th over G to the 8th would be our stopping point on that question. Organize yourselves, take your time, and I think you should be okay. Now again, yes, this is there are a few steps in these problems, but it does not mean that that is out of your reach. It just means that, again, you're getting older, you're getting smarter, and you are moving into areas to where you're expected to do a little bit more in terms of responsibility. In this case, the only thing that scares people is the fact that you see a fraction. I understand that. But we are going to follow our rules right now. We're going to put y to the 3/4 times 4, z to the 7 times 4, because that's what we've done on everything else. If you look at it, and I'll even pull it back here, I have listed the multiplications based off of what was there. So you don't change just because you see a fraction. Don't let that intimidate you. But the difference is we are going to use this because we know how to. And I told you that anytime you type in a fraction, use parentheses. So parentheses 3/4 times 4. Notice it's not even a tough number. It's 3. So you end up with y to the 3rd, z to the 28th. There are no negative exponents. There aren't even any fractions, and everything works out just fine. So again, what some people do in terms of questions is they put fractions in front of you just so you quit and you don't even try it. But you notice this wasn't even that hard. Just make sure you know how to type this in. And actually, while I'm talking right now, you probably want to take your calculator and try to make sure you can do 3/4 times 4 to get the answer of 3, because the guarantee on today's sheet is you are going to have a fraction somewhere on there to deal with. 3r to the 2/5 to the negative 3rd. Again, drop your exponent down. That becomes 3 to the negative 3rd. R to the 2/5 times negative 3. Again, that's the only two things that were in there. 3 to the negative third we can do here. 3 caret and negative 3 is a decimal, which we turn into a fraction by hitting math, enter, enter, getting 1 over 27. R is going to go to the, I don't know what 2/5 times negative 3 is, so 2/5 times negative 3 gives me a decimal. So again, we convert that, which is negative 6 over 5. Once again, you have a fraction and you have a variable with a negative exponent. It means that that variable wants to go down with the 27. So our final answer is 1 over 27r to the 6/5. Again, the negative 6/5 told me that the r wants to go down. The 1/27 means 27 is obviously on the bottom, and that is where everything is. Alright. And then one more fractional type problem you're going to see has a fractional exponent, which again, yes, it might be slightly intimidating for you to see it, but you need to get over it because you notice that the calculator does all the work, or you eventually actually will get better at dealing with fractions as you keep working with them, which is why I keep putting them in front of you. Either way, you get 4 to the negative 1/2 x to the 10 times negative 1/2. From there, we need to figure out what 4 to the negative 1/2 is. Parentheses, negative 1/2. Remember, every fraction goes into parentheses. Getting the answer 0.5, which we know to be 1/2. Now let me show you what happens if you did not type that in correctly, which is 4 caret negative 1 divided by 2 is a whole different decimal that you got, which will give you a whole different answer. Make sure whenever you type these things that you use your parentheses the way you're supposed to. So 4 caret parentheses negative 1/2 equals, convert it to be 1/2. So we get 1 over 2 x, remember that goes right by the line because we don't know where it's going. 10 times 1/2 shouldn't be bad, common sense. 1/2 of 10 is what? So I do 10 parentheses negative 1/2, again in parentheses there, which is negative 5. And once again, this x to the negative 5th means x wants to go down here, so you end up with 1 over 2 x to the 5th. So what I need you to do now is use the rest of the hour to practice your skill. Tomorrow's quiz is going to have questions about the following things. 0 powers, remember 0 powers, anything to the 0 power is 1. Also, if you have a 0 power variable and they want you to simplify, you can just cross it out because that means that there are no variables there for you to deal with. Negative exponents we just dealt with. Remember, if it's negative, it wants to go to the other side of the fraction because it's unhappy. Power over power, which is where you have to make sure you know x to the 5th, x to the 3rd, 5x is here, 3x is there. You add them up to get x to the 8th. And then this one where you have the number on the outside of the parentheses, which is 5 times 3, or x to the 15th. Make sure you know the difference between those two. Again, the easiest thing I use is, since this number is right outside of a parentheses, we multiply. Both of these represent exponents for x's, or for a variable, which means there's 5, and 3, which makes 8. There's also problems from today's practice that are going to be on there. Just be sure to study so we can begin to increase our grade in the class for the end of the quarter. There are actually only 3 more weeks after tomorrow's quiz. So, like I said, start taking it seriously. For those of you who sincerely want to pass, make sure you start putting yourself in position to do so. You do not want to try to do it in the last week because it never works like that. So, again, knock this out today. Ask questions. Make sure you learn it. Good luck.